Hi, I'm Bill Montgomery. I've been asked to introduce this film about how we got together and built the present Orcas Island Community Church building. It all happened 40 years ago now, and what a project it was. With help from Ray Pinio, Pastor John LeCompte acting as general contractor and straw boss. Most of the labor was donated by our own people and even by others in the community. On some work days, it seemed like the whole of Orcas Island turned out to help. Dimensional lumber was milled right here on the island. Concrete was mixed and poured by hand, the old-fashioned way. The movie covers 5 years from the groundbreaking to the first Sunday service held in September 1967. Many of the people you'll see are with the Lord now. Those of us who are still here have gotten a good deal older somehow. At the end of the movie, we'll try to match up names with some of the faces. Mind you, there were no home video cameras back in the 60s, so the movie was shot using 8mm film like a home movie. The picture quality may leave a bit to be desired, but this film is still pretty good account of the interesting chapters in our history, and it's a real tribute to God's faithfulness as well as the devotion of His people here on Orcas. Yeah. And so, here is A Time to Build.
"76 years the old church has stood here. More than 3/4 of a century of Sunday services, weddings, baptisms, funerals. As many as 4 generations of Orcas Islanders have worshipped within these walls. Yet its years of usefulness are over. It is time to think now of future generations of Islanders. It is a time to build." Dates back to 1884 when Reverend John Tennant and his Indian wife arrived here and began organizing the first Methodist church in the San Juans. After much struggle, a building was erected and was, on July 31st, 1887, dedicated to the service of God. The belfry was added in 1891, and Sunday school rooms came much later. By the late 1950s, there was much talk of rebuilding. But the project really began the day young Mike Hurley walked into Reverend Don Beatty's office and produced 6 cents as the initial contribution.
The place where most of you are standing is the approximate entrance of the new church building. And we hope that you'll pass through that area often for a long time.
On October 8, 1961, at a congregational meeting during the morning service, the building committee was authorized to proceed. A year later, on October 31st, the groundbreaking ceremony was held at the future site. Approximately 85 to 100 persons were present. Reverend John LeCompte, who had succeeded Mr. Beatty as pastor, conducted the service at which drawings of the new building were displayed, and the Lord's blessing was asked on the site and on those who would be working on it.
I would like to give you just a brief word of greeting in the form of a letter from the former pastor who was here at the time the church purchased additional property, at the time that this 3 acres was purchased, and at the time that the building fund was begun. I have come across some correspondence which Reverend Beatty had writing about and to the same architect which our building committee has engaged to design our new church. And I would like to present this afternoon the letter from the Reverend Don Beatty, now serving at the Galvin Bible Chapel near Centralia. This will express my regrets as I am not able to be with you for the groundbreaking ceremonies for the new church next Sunday. Please pass this along to the congregation, and I trust that the invitation will again be extended when you have your formal dedication service upon completion. Certainly the groundbreaking ceremony...
Mr. E.J. Young, a longtime member of the church, turned over the first shovelful of dirt. Mr. Young was 94 at the time. After the ceremony, I asked Mr. Young to repeat his remarks for this film.
I said that I had handled the shovel many times, but never on such an important occasion as this. That was one thing he said. Another one was Trump was I lived in an irrigated country where a shovel was more necessary than a bed. And there's more truth to that than poetry.
Excavating for the new building began on Wednesday, March 13th, 1963. From the very beginning, virtually all of the work on the new structure was volunteered by church members and others in the community. On June 6, 1964, mixing and pouring concrete for the basement walls was truly a community affair. The well-organized effort began at 6:30 in the morning and continued to 3:30 p.m. At noon, island residents arrived with hot dishes, salads, and desserts to feed the 35-man crew in shifts. In all, 400 sacks of cement were used to mix and pour 80 yards of concrete. Back in 1962, the famous Columbus Day windstorm had downed many Sound Island trees, actually an ill wind that blew us much good in the form of donated timber. Logs were salvaged and hauled to Bond's lumber mill near Doe Bay for custom sawing and planing. In all, 33,000 board feet of fine lumber were obtained for the new church in this manner. The building began to take noticeable form when laminated arches and purlins manufactured in Tacoma were raised into position in June 1965. Pews and some fixtures were obtained from the Plymouth Congregational Church in Seattle, which was also proceeding with a new building program. Tuesday and Thursday evening work bee nights continued throughout the summers of 1965 and 1966, and every Saturday was work day. The church's 585-pound bell was lovingly restored for the new belfry. It had come around the horn and was mounted in the old church since 1891. Another marathon concrete pour took place on Saturday, August 26, 1967, as the basement floor took shape. Finishing work would continue on to the stroke of midnight, but the pour itself was completed at noon. Meanwhile, electricians were hard at work upstairs. At noon, all hands enjoyed a hot dinner. Moving the church's Moeller pipe organ and Schulmerich chimes was a major project. Charles Wasberg came up from Seattle to take apart and then reassemble the large number of soldered connections, superintend the move, and retune the instrument. As moving day approached, finishing touches were applied. The coffee break, a welcome part of any work session, and even the cameraman gets a cup. Now the new building has become a part of the East Sound skyline. But let us turn back the calendar for just a bit and review some scenes from the past. This earliest known photo of the church was taken in 1901. Reverend and Mrs. John Tennant, so poor they lived on clams to start the work here. David Kimple, an Orcas Island pioneer, was interim pastor on several occasions. Churches in the East sent missionary boxes of cast-offs to clothe the large family of Reverend and Mrs. T.L. Dyer. Isaac Dillon lost his life rowing from Lopus to an Orcas Island preaching engagement. David Kimple's grandson Dillon was named for Dr. Dillon. Reverend and Mrs. S.V. Warren served here just after the turn of the century. Reverend J.W. Moles, grandfather of Roy Franklin. And so many more faithfully preaching Christ down through the year. Reverend Edward Smith was a former missionary driven from China by the communists. The longest ministry was that of Fred S. Eastman, shown here with Mrs. Eastman. He served 22 years before he retired here and was often called on to preach afterwards. Reverend William Allen, another ex-China missionary, and his family. And this is the old church in its last years, the way most of us will always remember it. And now the day of the big move is here at last. It is September 3rd, 1967. The Sunday morning service begins as usual in the old building. Then, after the doxology and a hymn, Deputy Sheriff Don Lohman stopped the traffic outside. The congregation emerged, each one carrying a hymn book, and began the short walk to the new Orcas Island Community Church. Ed Young, now 99, was brought from the convalescent center in Friday Harbor to be in attendance. And so the new building was dedicated to the service and to the glory of God. May it and we always so serve and so glorify Him. For that is the goal and the prayer of the Orcas Island Community Church.